The sun beat down on the dry, cracked earth, casting long, harsh shadows across the endless expanse of sand. The desert was a place that demanded respect. It was unforgiving and vast, stretching for miles in every direction. There was no sign of life, no sound, just the quiet hum of the wind blowing grains of sand across the arid landscape. Jack had been walking for hours, the weight of his gear pulling heavily on his shoulders. He had been traveling through this desert for the past few days, on a personal journey to clear his mind and escape the noise of civilization. He wasn't expecting much more than solitude and the usual dry, scorching heat. His water supply was running low, and the sun was setting on the horizon, casting a reddish glow over the land. It was time to set up camp for the night. Jack adjusted his pack and looked for a place to rest when something caught his eye. Something strange, something out of place. In the distance, barely visible against the rolling dunes, he saw a figure lying on the ground. It was small and frail, not a creature he recognized. At first, Jack thought it was just a mirage, a trick of the light. But as he squinted, he saw that it was definitely a person, or something that looked like one. His heart began to race. He didn't know who or what it was, but there was no doubt in his mind that this person needed help. Jack's instincts kicked in. He couldn't just leave someone stranded out here in the desert. Jack hurried towards the figure, each step growing heavier as the soft sand sucked at his boots. The closer he got, the more he realized how strange this being was. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen before. Her skin had a soft, pale blue tint, unlike the typical human tones he was used to. Her body was delicate, fragile, and there was something ethereal about her appearance, like she didn't quite belong to Earth. But what stood out the most was the emptiness in her eyes. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and dry, and her body was covered in dirt and sand. She had clearly been out here for a long time. Jack knelt beside her, careful not to startle her. He noticed she was breathing, but her breaths were shallow, weak. Her clothes were torn, and she looked like she hadn't eaten or drunk anything in days. His heart sank. "Hey, are you okay?" Jack asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes flickered open, her gaze unfocused at first. She blinked a few times, trying to make sense of her surroundings. When her eyes finally landed on him, she looked confused, her face twisting with a mix of fear and exhaustion. She opened her mouth as if to speak but couldn't form any words. Jack could see the desperation in her eyes, and without thinking, he pulled out his water bottle. He carefully lifted her head slightly and helped her drink a small amount of water. She drank eagerly, the liquid spilling slightly down her chin. When she finished, she looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You're safe now," Jack said softly, though he had no idea who she was or where she came from. "I'm not going to leave you here." He placed his water bottle down and reached into his pack, pulling out some dried fruit and jerky. Slowly, he offered her a small piece, watching as she hesitated for a moment before taking it. She ate it slowly, savoring the small amount of food, her hands trembling as she held it. Jack was relieved to see that she was at least starting to regain some energy. As the minutes passed, Jack carefully propped her up and removed some of the sand from her clothes. She didn't resist, though she still seemed distant, her eyes wandering as though she were trapped in a world of confusion. He didn't know who she was or how she ended up in the desert, but he knew she needed help. "Where did you come from?" Jack asked, though he wasn't sure if she understood him. There was no response at first, but her gaze sharpened for a brief moment, and she glanced up at him. She opened her mouth, but the words that came out were foreign, sounds that Jack couldn't comprehend. It was then that Jack realized that this wasn't just a stranded traveler. This was something, or someone, far more alien. He didn't know what she was, but it was clear she wasn't from Earth. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't leave her out here. It was a miracle he had found her, and something inside him told him that there was more to this encounter than a simple case of a lost wanderer. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the desert grew colder. Jack had to think quickly. He couldn't leave her out here overnight, and with the night coming on, it would be even more dangerous. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere safer." He helped the alien woman to her feet, her legs unsteady as she struggled to keep her balance. She looked at him with those wide, uncertain eyes, but for the first time since he had found her, a small hint of trust seemed to flicker in them. She didn't speak, but she didn't try to pull away either. Jack took the lead, guiding her slowly back towards the shelter he had planned to set up for the night. As they walked, the alien woman continued to stare at him with a quiet intensity. Jack could feel the weight of her gaze, the silent questions that lay behind it, and the odd connection that was beginning to form between them. Though he had no idea what to expect, one thing was certain. This was the start of something far beyond what he could have imagined. The desert night was cold. As Jack led the alien woman back to his makeshift shelter, the sky above stretched out in a blanket of stars, each one shining like a tiny beacon of light. The winds had quieted down, but the chill still crept into his bones. He helped the woman sit down next to the small fire he had started, and the warmth seemed to soothe her for the moment. Jack pulled out his first aid kit, which he always kept with him, just in case. The alien woman sat silently, watching his every move. Her eyes were wide, taking in everything with a mix of curiosity and confusion, yet there was still that lingering sadness in them. She had not spoken a word since their first encounter, but Jack noticed that she didn't flinch when he moved around her. That, at least, was a good sign. "Let's take care of you first," Jack said gently, though he wasn't sure if she could understand him. He began by checking her for any obvious injuries. There were several scrapes and bruises, but nothing that looked life-threatening. She had cuts on her arms, likely from falling or running through the rough terrain. He cleaned the wounds carefully, applying antiseptic to each one. She winced slightly at the sting, but she didn't pull away. As Jack worked, he couldn't help but wonder more about her. Who was she? How had she ended up in the desert all alone? What kind of person, or creature, was she? She wasn't like anything Jack had seen before. Her pale, blue-tinged skin shimmered under the firelight, and her eyes, though filled with uncertainty, held an intelligence that was hard to miss. Her clothes were torn in several places, likely from the harsh desert conditions. He carefully pulled out a clean, spare shirt from his bag and handed it to her. She hesitated before taking it, her gaze flicking between him and the shirt. Jack smiled reassuringly, and she slowly began to put it on, though it was clear she was still struggling with the unfamiliar clothing. "Better?" Jack asked, as he sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. She nodded quietly, her lips parting slightly as though she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Jack didn't press her for an answer. He simply handed her a small piece of dried fruit, watching as she accepted it, and ate slowly. The silence between them was strange but comfortable. Jack tried to think of something to say, something that might break the tension, but the words didn't come. Instead, he focused on the fire, stoking it slightly to keep it burning. He had never been good at talking to people he didn't know, especially when there was so much at stake. After a while, the woman finally spoke, her voice quiet but soft. "Thank you." Jack's head snapped around, surprised to hear her speak. Her voice was melodic, but there was something foreign in her accent, something that made the words seem distant and unfamiliar. It wasn't like any language he had ever heard, but the gratitude in her eyes was unmistakable. "I didn't think anyone would find me," she continued, her voice growing weaker with each word. She looked down at her hands, as though ashamed of her weakness. I am lost." Jack didn't know what to say. Instead, he simply nodded and offered her more water. She drank it eagerly, though her hands still trembled. "You're safe now," Jack reassured her, though he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. Safe from the desert, perhaps, but the night was far from over. And Jack still had no idea what he was supposed to do next. The alien woman's eyes grew distant again, and Jack could sense that she was struggling with something. She was far from being the typical lost wanderer he had expected. There was a deep sadness in her eyes, and Jack wondered if she was haunted by memories or fears she wasn't ready to share. As she sat there, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for her. She was completely alone in a strange world, with no way to communicate with anyone other than him. He was, at this moment, her only lifeline. "So, where are you from?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. He didn't know if she'd understand, but it was worth a shot. The woman glanced up at him, her gaze lingering for a moment. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Jack thought for a moment that she was trying to form the words, but there was something wrong. She closed her eyes and shook her head. I don't know," she whispered finally. "I am not from here." The words hit Jack like a sudden gust of wind. "You're not from Earth." She shook her head again. "No, I do not belong here. I was sent here, but something went wrong. I was lost." Her voice trembled as she spoke, as if she were recalling something painful. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, and he could tell she was holding something back. He didn't press her for more details. It was clear she wasn't ready to talk about whatever had happened to her. Jack sat back, trying to process everything. There was so much he didn't know about this alien woman, but one thing was clear. She was not someone he could leave behind. She had no one. And as crazy as it seemed, he had already grown attached to her in these few short hours. He glanced at her again, her delicate features lit by the flickering light of the fire. She wasn't just some lost traveler. She was something more, something he couldn't yet understand. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Jack knew he wasn't going to leave her. He would help her, whatever it took. "You're not alone anymore," Jack said softly, as much to reassure himself as to reassure her. For a moment, the alien woman's gaze softened, and Jack saw a tiny flicker of hope in her eyes. The fire crackled between them, and the desert, with all its harshness, seemed a little less intimidating. The next morning, Jack woke early. The desert air was still cool, but the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. He looked over at the alien woman, who was still asleep, resting beside the fire. She had curled up under the blanket he had given her, though she appeared uncomfortable in the unfamiliar surroundings. Jack quietly packed up his things, not wanting to disturb her. He had been thinking about what she had said the night before, about not belonging here. The more he thought about it, the more questions filled his mind. Who was she? Where did she come from? And why was she alone in a desert so far from home? As the day grew brighter, the alien woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she blinked, taking in her surroundings. Jack noticed the subtle shift in her expression as she slowly realized where she was. "You're awake," Jack said, offering her a small smile. The alien woman sat up slowly, stretching her arms with a soft groan. She still looked weak, but there was a quiet strength in her movements. She met Jack's gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice still a little shaky but clearer than the day before. Jack nodded. "I hope you slept well." She smiled faintly but didn't speak for a moment. Instead, she seemed to be deep in thought, her eyes distant. Jack decided it was time to ask more about her. He had a feeling she might be ready to share something more today. "Are you feeling better?" he asked. "You were pretty weak last night." The alien woman nodded, though her eyes still held a trace of sadness. She took a deep breath and looked at Jack. There was a moment of hesitation before she began to speak, her voice low and quiet. "I don't belong here," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am not from your world, Jack. My name is Aurelia. I come from a distant place, far beyond this planet. My people, we are explorers, sent to learn and study the worlds we visit." Jack sat down next to her, intrigued. He had so many questions, but he didn't want to interrupt her. Instead, he let her continue, sensing that she needed to tell her story on her own time. "I was part of a mission," Aurelia continued, her eyes growing distant again. "We were sent to explore this planet. My team, we were supposed to gather information, learn about your species, and return home. But something went wrong. Our ship, it was attacked." Jack's heart sank. He had a feeling the story wouldn't be a simple one. Aurelia's eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret as she continued, each word seeming to take more effort to speak. "The attack came out of nowhere," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know who did it, but they destroyed our ship. I was the only one who survived. I crashed here, on this planet, alone." Jack's mind raced. A ship attack, a foreign species. This was beyond anything he had imagined when he found her in the desert. He didn't know what to say, but he could see the pain in Aurelia's eyes. She wasn't just lost. She had been through something much darker. "I tried to find my people," Aurelia whispered, her voice breaking. "But I couldn't. I couldn't even contact them. I've been wandering for days, trying to survive. I didn't know if anyone would find me. I didn't even know if anyone would care." Jack's heart ached for her. He had never imagined that helping someone could lead to a story like this, one of fear, pain, and survival. But it also explained the way she had looked at him when they first met. She had been scared, and now he understood why. "You're safe now," Jack said softly, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I found you, and I'll help you, Aurelia. You don't have to be alone anymore." Aurelia's eyes met his, and for the first time since he had found her, there was a glimmer of hope in them. She had been lost, both physically and emotionally, but now, with Jack, she wasn't completely alone. "I don't know if I can ever repay you for saving me," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've given me a chance to live again." Jack smiled gently. "I'm not asking for repayment. I just want to help you get back to where you belong." Aurelia seemed to contemplate his words, her expression softening. For a long moment, there was a silence between them, as if both of them were thinking deeply about the same thing. Finally, Aurelia spoke again, her voice steady now. "There's more I need to tell you, Jack. More about my people, and the reason I don't want to go back." Jack's curiosity piqued. He leaned in, giving her his full attention. "My people." Aurelia paused, collecting her thoughts. "We are not like your kind. We value knowledge, wisdom, and exploration. But we also believe in strict order. There are rules, guidelines. If I failed in my mission, if I couldn't return with the information we were meant to gather, I would be considered a failure. I would be punished. My people don't forgive those who fail their duties." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He could only imagine what kind of punishment Aurelia was referring to. The idea that her people would punish someone for failing a mission, it was hard to wrap his mind around. "That's why I don't want to go back," she said softly. "I can't go back to face the punishment. I'd rather stay here, with you." Jack looked at her in shock. Aurelia wasn't just lost and stranded. She was also running from something much darker, something beyond her control. And now she was looking to him for help. The weight of her trust in him was heavy, but it also stirred something deep inside him. "You don't have to go back," Jack said firmly. "Not if you don't want to. We'll figure this out together." For the first time, Aurelia's face softened into a smile, and Jack knew that, no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The days in the desert passed by slowly, each one blending into the next as Jack and Aurelia continued their quiet routine. They spent their mornings by the fire, and the afternoons were spent walking through the vast desert. Jack showed her how to gather food and water, though Aurelia was still adjusting to the harsh environment. She wasn't used to the heat or the dry air, but she was learning. Over time, the bond between them grew stronger. At first, Jack had simply seen her as someone he needed to help, someone stranded and lost. But now he realized that there was more to their relationship than just survival. Aurelia was no longer just a stranger he had found in the desert. She was becoming something more. As they spent more time together, they started talking more. Aurelia told him about her world, her people, and the things she had seen in her travels across the galaxy. Jack shared stories of his life on Earth, about the people he knew, the struggles he had faced, and the things he hoped to achieve. Though their worlds were vastly different, they found common ground in their experiences. Both had known loneliness, both had known fear, and both were, in their own way, searching for something. One evening, as the sun set behind the dunes and the stars began to appear in the sky, Aurelia asked Jack a question. "Do you ever wonder if there's more to life than this?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack looked up at the sky, the endless expanse of stars stretching out above them. He thought about her question for a moment. "I used to," he admitted. "I used to think that there had to be something bigger, something beyond all this. But now, I think I'm starting to understand that sometimes it's the small things that matter the most. The moments we share with others, the people we choose to help." Aurelia's eyes met his, her gaze thoughtful. "I used to think that too," she said. "But I was taught to always follow the mission, always follow the rules. It's hard to break free from that way of thinking." Jack smiled gently. "You're not bound by those rules anymore, Aurelia. You can make your own choices now." She nodded slowly, a soft, uncertain smile crossing her face. For the first time, she looked truly free. The burden of her past, the rules, the punishment, seemed to be lifting, if only a little. And for Jack, it felt like they were both learning how to let go of their pasts and look towards something better. As the days went on, Jack began to notice small things. Aurelia's laughter, though soft, was genuine. She would smile when she watched Jack struggle to gather food or build a shelter, as if she found amusement in his awkwardness. And when she shared her own skills Jack had never known, he couldn't help but feel admiration for her. She was so different from anyone he had ever known. But in that difference, there was something beautiful. But there was still a part of Aurelia that Jack couldn't quite reach. Though she had opened up to him in ways she never had before, there were moments when she seemed distant, her mind far away, her thoughts clouded. Jack didn't press her. He understood that her past wasn't something she could easily forget. There was a pain in her eyes that didn't go away, no matter how much she tried to hide it. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jack decided to ask her something he had been wondering for a while. "What do you want, Aurelia?" he asked softly. "I mean, now that you're here, now that we're together, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go?" Aurelia looked at him, surprised by the question. She had never thought about it before. She had always been focused on her mission, on survival. But now, with Jack's quiet presence beside her, she realized that for the first time, she had the chance to make a choice, to decide her own future. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I never thought I'd have the chance to choose. I was always told what to do, where to go. But now," she looked down at her hands, the firelight casting shadows across her face. "Now I think I want to find something more than just surviving. I want to find a place where I can belong, a place where I can be more than just a failure." Jack's heart went out to her. "You're not a failure, Aurelia. You've survived, and that's something. More than most people ever manage." She met his gaze, and for a moment, there was a soft understanding between them. They both knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like the world was too big and too confusing to make sense of. But maybe, just maybe, they had found a piece of it together. Aurelia took a deep breath. "Maybe," she said softly, "what I need is to find a way to be free. Free from my past, free from the expectations of my people, and free from the fear of being alone." Jack nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of protectiveness. "Then you're free now," he said. "No one can make you feel trapped unless you let them. And I won't let that happen." For the first time since their meeting, Aurelia's eyes shone with something other than sadness. It was a glimmer of hope, a spark of possibility. The days began to blur together as they continued their journey through the desert. With each passing day, their connection grew stronger. They laughed more, shared more, and helped each other through the harsh conditions. They had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time, neither of them felt like they were walking alone. As they spent more time together, they started talking more. Aurelia told him about her world, her people, and the things she had seen in her travels across the galaxy. Jack shared stories of his life on Earth, about the people he knew, the struggles he had faced, and the things he hoped to achieve. Though their worlds were vastly different, they found common ground in their experiences. Both had known loneliness, both had known fear, and both were, in their own way, searching for something. One evening, as the sun set behind the dunes and the stars began to appear in the sky, Aurelia asked Jack a question. "Do you ever wonder if there's more to life than this?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack looked up at the sky, the endless expanse of stars stretching out above them. He thought about her question for a moment. "I used to," he admitted. "I used to think that there had to be something bigger, something beyond all this. But now, I think I'm starting to understand that sometimes it's the small things that matter the most. The moments we share with others, the people we choose to help." Aurelia's eyes met his, her gaze thoughtful. "I used to think that too," she said. "But I was taught to always follow the mission, always follow the rules. It's hard to break free from that way of thinking." Jack smiled gently. "You're not bound by those rules anymore, Aurelia. You can make your own choices now." She nodded slowly, a soft, uncertain smile crossing her face. For the first time, she looked truly free. The burden of her past, the rules, the punishment, seemed to be lifting, if only a little. And for Jack, it felt like they were both learning how to let go of their pasts and look towards something better. As the days went on, Jack began to notice small things. Aurelia's laughter, though soft, was genuine. She would smile when she watched Jack struggle to gather food or build a shelter, as if she found amusement in his awkwardness. And when she shared her own skills Jack had never known, he couldn't help but feel admiration for her. She was so different from anyone he had ever known, but in that difference, there was something beautiful. But there was still a part of Aurelia that Jack couldn't quite reach. Though she had opened up to him in ways she never had before, there were moments when she seemed distant, her mind far away, her thoughts clouded. Jack didn't press her. He understood that her past wasn't something she could easily forget. There was a pain in her eyes that didn't go away, no matter how much she tried to hide it. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jack decided to ask her something he had been wondering for a while. "What do you want, Aurelia?" he asked softly. "I mean, now that you're here, now that we're together, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go?" Aurelia looked at him, surprised by the question. She had never thought about it before. She had always been focused on her mission, on survival. But now, with Jack's quiet presence beside her, she realized that for the first time, she had the chance to make a choice, to decide her own future. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I never thought I'd have the chance to choose. I was always told what to do, where to go. But now," she looked down at her hands, the firelight casting shadows across her face. "Now, I think I want to find something. Something more than just surviving. I want to find a place where I can belong. A place where I can be more than just a failure." Jack's heart went out to her. "You're not a failure, Aurelia. You've survived. And that's something. More than most people ever manage." She met his gaze, and for a moment, there was a soft understanding between them. They both knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like the world was too big and too confusing to make sense of. But maybe, just maybe, they had found a piece of it together. Aurelia took a deep breath. "Maybe," she said softly, "what I need is to find a way to be free. Freed from my past. free from the expectations of my people, and free from the fear of being alone. Jack nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of protectiveness. Then you're free now, he said. No one can make you feel trapped unless you let them. And I won't let that happen. For the first time since their meeting, Aurelia's eyes shone with something other than sadness. It was a glimmer of hope, a spark of possibility. The days began to blur together as they continued their journey through the desert. With each passing day, their connection grew stronger. They laughed more, shared more, and helped each other through the harsh conditions. They had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time, neither of them felt like they were walking alone. Jack could see it now, in the way Aurelia looked at him when they worked together, the way her hand brushed against his when they walked side by side. There was no longer just an alien in the desert, a stranger he had found. There was something deeper, something stronger between them. And as they walked forward into the unknown, Jack realized that maybe, just maybe, their paths had crossed for a reason. The desert had become a place of routine for Jack and Aurelia. Each day was filled with the same survival tasks: gathering food, searching for water, building shelter from the harsh sun. It was hard, exhausting work, but they had grown comfortable in each other's company. The quiet companionship between them had become a balm for the loneliness they had both carried for so long. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high in the sky, Jack and Aurelia sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the vast desert. Jack wiped his brow with the back of his hand, the heat of the day relentless. Aurelia had been quiet for the past few minutes, staring into the distance, her thoughts far away. Jack didn't push her to speak. He knew that sometimes she needed her space. "I've been thinking," Jack said, breaking the silence. "Maybe it's time we try to head toward the nearest city. We can get some supplies, maybe even send a message to your people. I know you're not ready to go back, but—" "No," Aurelia interrupted, her voice sharp. She quickly looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "I can't go back. I told you, Jack. I can't face them. I can't go back to what I was. Please, you have to understand." Jack's heart sank. He had hoped that with time, Aurelia would feel more at ease, but her fear was still very real. He had noticed how often she avoided talking about her people, how quickly she shut down whenever the subject came up. He didn't know what kind of life she had left behind, but he could see that it haunted her. "I understand," Jack said softly, trying to reassure her. He put a hand on her arm, and she looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. "We'll figure something out," he added, his voice firm but gentle. "But we have to stay cautious. The desert is a dangerous place, Aurelia. And I've been thinking. I think we should start moving toward the mountains. It's safer there, and we might find a better place to settle for a while. We can't stay here forever." Aurelia nodded, her gaze softening as she considered his words. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew he was right. The desert was unforgiving. But the thought of leaving the only place she had felt safe in for so long made her anxious. Still, she had learned to trust Jack, and that trust was beginning to feel like the only thing keeping her grounded. They packed their things quickly and began their journey toward the distant mountains. The heat of the day had begun to subside as the sun moved lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sand. The landscape was harsh, but with each step, Aurelia felt a sense of something new. It wasn't just the physical journey. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, she was beginning to step away from the weight of her past. As they traveled, Jack kept a careful eye on their surroundings. The desert was a place of solitude, but it was also a place where danger could appear without warning, and Jack had learned to be cautious. He knew that something wasn't quite right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that Jack first noticed the signs. At first, it was subtle, footprints in the sand, slightly disturbed, as if someone had been following them. He stopped and looked around, his senses on high alert. Aurelia noticed his hesitation and stopped beside him. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly, her eyes scanning the horizon. Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched down and examined the tracks. They were fresh, leading off toward the east. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had seen similar signs before, back when he was in the military. These weren't the marks of someone traveling through the desert. These were the signs of someone tracking them. "I think we're being followed," Jack said, his voice low. "We need to keep moving, but we have to be careful." Aurelia's eyes widened in fear. "Who could be following us?" "Is it them?" she whispered. Jack didn't know, but the thought of Aurelia's people, or anyone, really coming after them made his blood run cold. He had no idea what they would do if they found them. The only thing Jack knew for sure was that they couldn't let anyone catch up to them. They quickened their pace, but as the sun began to set, they found themselves on a narrow trail between two high ridges. It was the perfect spot for an ambush. The wind had picked up, carrying sand with it, making it harder to see. Jack felt a prickling sense of danger in the air, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Suddenly, from the shadows between the rocks, figures appeared. Jack's heart raced as he reached for the weapon he kept strapped to his side, a small but powerful pistol. There were 3 of them, armed and wearing gear that looked foreign, even by Jack's standards. Their faces were covered by masks, but their body language told him everything he needed to know. They were here for Aurelia. "Stay behind me," Jack ordered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Aurelia stood frozen for a moment, her wide eyes locked on the men who had appeared before them. She recognized them. These were not her people, but they were part of the group that had attacked her ship. Jack could see the recognition in her eyes as well. This wasn't just an ordinary encounter. This was something much worse. The men stepped forward, their weapons aimed at Jack and Aurelia. The leader of the group spoke, his voice muffled by his mask. "Step aside, human. She belongs to us," the man said. Jack's grip on his pistol tightened. "She's not going anywhere with you." Aurelia's voice broke the tension. "Please, don't hurt him," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader paused, a flicker of confusion passing across his face. He hadn't expected her to speak. "Aurelia," he said, his tone growing colder. "You're coming with us." Aurelia took a deep breath, her face hardening. "I don't belong to you. I'm not going anywhere." Jack didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let anyone take Aurelia. Not without a fight. The tension between Jack, Aurelia, and the strangers in the desert was thick. The air felt heavy, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Jack's hand tightened around the pistol at his side, ready for whatever came next. His eyes flicked back and forth, studying the men before them. They were a threat. That much was clear. But Jack wasn't about to let them take Aurelia, no matter who they were. Aurelia stood still beside him, her posture tense but resolute. Jack could feel the fear radiating off her, but there was something else too, something stronger. She wasn't going to let them have her again. Jack had seen it in her eyes since the moment they met. She had survived so much, and now, here she was, standing her ground. The leader of the group, a tall man with a rough look about him, took a step forward. His weapon remained pointed at Jack, though his attention seemed focused on Aurelia. "You can't hide forever," the leader said, his voice low and harsh. "Your people want you back. You're coming with us." Aurelia's hands clenched into fists, and she took a step forward, her body moving instinctively, as if she were ready to face the men head-on. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I'm not going back to that life. You can't make me." Jack looked at her in surprise. He had expected fear, maybe hesitation, but not defiance. Aurelia was standing up to them in a way he hadn't expected. And that made him feel something new. Admiration. The leader sneered, looking from Jack to Aurelia. "You don't understand, little alien. You don't have a choice. You belong to us. You'll come quietly, or we'll make you." Jack's heart raced as he realized they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to force her back. But he couldn't let that happen, not after everything they had been through together. "You really think I'll let you take her?" Jack said, his voice cold. "You're making a big mistake." The men in the group exchanged uncertain glances, but they didn't lower their weapons. It was clear they weren't sure what Jack would do, but they weren't backing down either. Jack was outnumbered. He knew that. But there was something in him, something deep down, telling him that he couldn't let them win. The leader smirked again, then waved his hand. "Take him out. We'll bring her back to the ship." Before Jack could react, one of the men lunged at him. Jack sidestepped just in time, using his elbow to knock the man off balance. The other two rushed at him as well, but Jack was faster. He ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding their grasp, then came up swinging. He wasn't a trained fighter, but he had enough experience to hold his own. He had fought for his life before, and now he was fighting for Aurelia. Aurelia stood frozen for a moment, watching the struggle unfold before her. She wanted to help, to fight alongside Jack, but she knew she couldn't let herself be distracted. The leader was still watching her, waiting for her to make a move. Without warning, she moved. Aurelia sprang into action, her body reacting without thinking. She sprinted toward the leader, her movements fluid and fast. Before the man could raise his weapon, she was upon him, pushing him hard with both hands, sending him crashing into a pile of rocks. The leader cursed and scrambled to his feet, but Aurelia didn't give him a chance. She grabbed a large rock and hurled it toward him, striking him in the chest. He stumbled back, temporarily disoriented. The other men, seeing their leader momentarily down, hesitated. Jack took advantage of the pause. He reached into his bag and pulled out a flare gun, something he had kept just in case. With a quick motion, he fired it into the sky. The flare shot up in a burst of bright red light, signaling for help. The men froze in shock, looking up at the flare with wide eyes. "You should have thought about that before you attacked us," Jack said, breathing heavily but standing tall. The leader's face turned red with anger, and he reached for his weapon. But Aurelia was quicker. She lunged at him, knocking the gun from his hands and sending it skidding across the sand. "You're not taking me back," she said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. For a moment, it was as if the world stood still. The four men looked at each other, uncertainty now creeping into their expressions. Jack and Aurelia stood side by side, facing them, unshaken despite the odds. "Leave us," Jack said, his voice hard. "You're not welcome here." The men seemed to consider the situation. They had the numbers, but they didn't have the will. Aurelia's defiance, combined with Jack's determination, had shifted the balance. Slowly, the leader stood up, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You think you've won?" The leader sneered. "This isn't over. We'll be back. You can't hide from us forever." Aurelia stood tall, her eyes hardening. "You don't scare me, and I won't hide anymore. You don't control me." The leader looked like he was about to say something else, but with a sharp gesture, he motioned for his men to retreat. They turned and walked away, leaving Jack and Aurelia standing in the desert. As the sounds of the men's footsteps faded into the distance, Jack and Aurelia stood silently for a few moments. The flare had done its job. Help was on the way, but for now, they had won. Aurelia turned to Jack, her eyes softening as the tension in her body melted away. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, but filled with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that for me." Jack smiled, though he was still catching his breath. "I didn't do it for you," he said. "I did it for both of us. You don't have to face this alone. Not anymore." They both looked toward the horizon, where the light was beginning to change, signaling the end of another day. But this day had been different. They had faced their fears and fought back together. And for the first time, it felt like they had a chance at something more. A future. The next day, the desert felt different. The usual silence was still there, but now it was filled with a sense of calm. After the confrontation with the group of men, Jack and Aurelia knew they had to keep moving. The flare had done its job. Help was on the way, but the feeling of danger still lingered. They couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. As they packed up their things, Jack couldn't help but feel a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving, he was fighting for something. And Aurelia was no longer just the alien woman he had found in the desert. She had become someone he cared about, someone he was willing to protect no matter the cost. Aurelia stood beside him, looking out at the desert horizon. She seemed deep in thought, her expression serious, but there was a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Jack knew that despite everything that had happened, she was starting to feel a sense of freedom that she hadn't felt in a long time. "You okay?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Aurelia turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity he had grown used to. But today, there was something different about her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't the same woman who had been lost and alone in the desert. "I'm more than okay," she said softly. "I've never felt like this before." Jack raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Like what?" "Free," she said simply. "For the first time, I feel like I can choose my own path. Like I can be myself, not what they wanted me to be." Jack smiled, feeling a surge of pride for her. She had come a long way in such a short time. He had seen the change in her, and it made him believe that they could both start fresh, far from the shadows of their pasts. They packed up the last of their belongings and set off again, heading toward the distant mountains. The journey was long, and the desert was still as unforgiving as ever, but they were no longer facing it alone. They had each other now. As the day wore on, the landscape began to change. The flat, endless expanse of sand gave way to rocky outcrops and scattered scrub. The air grew cooler, and the winds picked up, whipping sand into the air. Jack kept his eyes on the horizon, but he couldn't help but glance at Aurelia from time to time. She was walking beside him, her pace steady, but her gaze was distant. "Do you miss them?" Jack asked, his voice low. He wasn't sure why he asked, but the question had been on his mind ever since they had fled from the group. Aurelia didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the sky, as if searching for the right words. "I miss parts of it," she said finally. "I miss the feeling of being part of something bigger. But I don't miss the rules. I don't miss being told what to do, what to think. I don't miss the fear of never being good enough." Jack nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had been part of a system before, too, and he knew how stifling it could feel to be controlled by expectations. He didn't ask her to elaborate further. He knew that her past was something she'd have to come to terms with on her own, in her own time. As they continued to walk, the terrain grew steeper, the sand turned to rocky ground, and the mountains in the distance seemed closer, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky. The air was colder here, and Jack pulled his jacket tighter around him. Aurelia seemed to notice his discomfort and offered him a small smile. "You're not used to the cold, are you?" she teased, her voice light. Jack laughed, feeling the warmth of her smile even in the cool air. "No, I'm more of a desert kind of guy, but it's nice to have a change." They walked for hours, the silence between them comfortable, the kind of quiet that only comes when two people have learned to trust each other. By the time the sun began to set, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they had reached the base of the mountains. The view was breathtaking, and Jack couldn't help but stop for a moment to take it all in. "This is it," he said, his voice full of awe. "The mountains. We've made it." Aurelia stood beside him, her eyes scanning the vast, beautiful landscape. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it." For a moment, they both just stood there, taking in the scene. The mountains rose above them, towering and majestic, while the desert stretched out behind them like a sea of sand. It was as if the world was offering them a new beginning, a fresh start. Jack turned to Aurelia, a question on his mind. "So, what now?" he asked. "Where do we go from here?" Aurelia looked at him, her gaze soft but determined. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I do know this. I want to make my own way in this world. No more hiding. No more running." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. She had found her voice, her strength, and he would be there to help her every step of the way. They made camp that night at the foot of the mountains. The fire crackled between them, and as they sat side by side, the world felt right for the first time in a long time. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, neither Jack nor Aurelia felt afraid. They had each other, and that was enough. The desert was behind them. The mountains were ahead, and with each step, they were closer to finding the life they both wanted together.